A friend of mine asked, do you oppose race realism? I thought I'd give some thoughts about this issue. First, there are problems with the term race realism, and we can talk about that in a minute. But let's just talk about what the word means, or what it is usually understood to mean. You go to wiktionary, just a generic definition would be this idea that there are empirical evidences supporting the notion that there are inborn differences, racial differences, sometimes used euphemistically to justify racism, such as racial bigotry, discrimination. So there are inborn racial differences. Well, I disagree with race realism because it states its case in a very ambiguous way. What kind of differences are you talking about? It's clear that currently, in a given population, at a given place and time, if you were to measure the height of all people that come from a certain racial background, and then a different one, that they would have differences, on average. But the trouble here is, there's all kinds of troubles. One is people try to say race is all, there's just one race, is the human race, so we need to mention, there is such thing as different racial backgrounds, right? People can trace their ancestry to a combination of people that lived in different continents or different parts of the world for a long period of time, and that genetically are slightly different from other people in such ways that creates different skin color, different range of facial appearances and height. And then what's going on here though with the race realists, which I have a problem with the view and I'll describe in a minute, is that, and I have a problem with the term, they're wanting to say that there might be inborn differences in terms of moral worth, character, intellect, ability, what kind of culture you're able to create. And so they want to tie race and culture. And when I say race here, I mean just your ancestry, your distinct ancestry. So one major problem is they're calling themselves the race realists. Well, that suggests that anybody that disagrees with them on their overall set of views is somehow being not realistic. Well, let's talk about the truth of the matter, and we can figure out whether they're being realists like they say. But it's a problem because it is debatable. It is debatable what it means when we speak of the word race or ethnicity or culture. These are issues that you cannot just simply sum up and say, I'm a race realist. I believe that there's such a thing as a white man and such a thing as a black man. Well, these things change over time. So what do you mean when you say realism? Now, let's acknowledge that there are differences in people's appearances based on their ancestry at a given point in time. That is to say, looked at on aggregate. But within any given supposed racial group, you are going to find that, there's a huge variety. And so even then, when you try to make a stereotype about this is what this race looks like or how tall they are or whatever, you're only dealing with averages and ranges. You're still dealing with human beings individually. So don't forget that. Now, who would deny that we do see differences among groups of people, and that those differences obviously point to them having a shared ancestor or group of ancestors? Sure. Yeah, it's visible. So am I realistic that there are different colors of skin? Of course. So I'm a skin color difference realist, right? But we want to avoid ascribing moral worth to these kinds of differences. Saying that people have certain personalities or values or character, that they're good at things, that they're bad at things, that they're honest or dishonest, hard workers or not hard workers. Those things, I think that the race realists want to try to say that those are caused, that they're socially and genetically determined, so that people of a certain ethnic background are going to have certain kinds of results. And there's nothing that can be done about it. That's what they want to say. And that's where I disagree. We'll get into why. So it's really troubling when you try to take a group and make generalizations about that group's behavior, such as their intellectual behavior, intellectual achievements, such as their criminality among the group, Now, studies show, I will not deny this, that in a given geographical area, in a given range of time, that there are different attainment levels among different groups. However you want to cut the groups, male and female, or in the United States, people that immigrated here from India or Pakistan versus people who immigrated here from Australia versus from some other country, people who had ancestors who were slaves and have become African Americans. They're not immigrants from Africa, but actually African Americans, which is a distinct group of people. We can make generalizations about these groups, and these would be accurate. These would be worth thinking about. But if you're going to do a study that's going to look at these groups and compare, say, criminal behavior by group, or how much money you have by group, or your test scores by group, be careful, because you're getting into the ground where you could, just by not being careful, you could accidentally enter into being bigoted toward individual people of that group or toward the group as a whole. And either one would be sinful and inappropriate. Why should you be a chauvinist based on racial background? Now let's discuss this. Suppose that you found a correlation between being an Indian American immigrant and being really good at math in a specific window of time. You might be able to show that right now, or even being wealthy. I think that it's true as a generalization right now that Indian American immigrants are more wealthy than most other groups in the United States, divided by race like that. Well, what are you going to say about that? Be careful what you imply, because does this mean that there is a superior race? I mean, or does it just mean that you have for whatever cultural conditions that brought about this current time, there's a situation today where the mothers and the fathers in these Indian American immigrant families are emphasizing education? Is that, and you know what, I saw Josh McDowell several months back, maybe a year back. He made a generalization of this kind that says, well, there are people in different cultures that seem to put more of a value on education. And he was asked to step away from public ministry for a little while. And I think he was embarrassed because he said that. But come now, we have to be realistic about the fact that there are groups of people that have different values currently, as shown in what they do. Do they pay for people to tutor their children or not? You can measure these things. Even just if you were to look at, say, Indian Americans choosing to tutor their children outside of school, there would be a statistical correlation there, wouldn't there? But look, if you're going to do a study that compares the level of career attainment, intellectual ability, criminality across racial groups, just know that you cannot isolate factors. So you don't know if it's a cultural thing that has been passed down from parent to child, that we should value learning in mathematics. We don't know. We don't know if it's historically this group has been treated well as they immigrated here. I mean, how long have they lived in the country? How long has this group lived in the country? And how have they been treated when they moved to the country? And when was it? And what circumstances? What's the nutrition of the group? What is their diet? These are all factors, aside from just the racial background or the ancestry line, that could be affecting attainment. So you cannot isolate these variables, and so a bivariate analysis is always going to lead you to potential problems. Beside all that, notice that groups and their outcomes change over time. So what may be true as far as the average height or the average math scores of a specific racial group at a specific time, that could change. And of course, individuals are going to change across a huge range. It is unjust to prejudge an individual based on his membership in a specific group of this kind. You didn't choose to be in a specific group, and you don't know. You don't know what his level of achievement is until you actually look at his level individually. In theory, suppose that there was a racial group. I don't know the name of the group. Say it's just some other group that you want to discuss. This group of people has, on average, 5 points lower in their math scores compared to the average. And then all of a sudden, the next Carl Gauss gets born in that group. And he turns out to be the world's best mathematician. But perhaps nobody will believe that he's good at math. Nobody will listen to him because they're prejudiced against him because he's a member of a certain group. You see, that's the problem we need to avoid. Racism, or racial bigotry, is typically understood as prejudging a person as morally or intellectually inferior because they are a member of some racial group. It's unreasonable to do that. Each person is an individual with his own unique qualities. They're not determined biologically or determined socially. People say, is it nature or nurture? What about free choice? Nature and nurture are not the only ingredients that go into making a person. A person makes himself. A person can decide, for whatever reason, he decides that he wants to have honest character, that he wants to be a hard worker, he wants to raise his level of education. And not only can individual people change their outcomes, groups can change their outcomes over time. So race realists, so-called, they tend to treat group behavior as biologically and socially determined. And they neglect the fact that people have agency. I apologize, there's a helicopter going by. Maybe I can get it in the background. There it is. It'll be gone in just a moment. So likewise, group behaviors shift over time. Race realists would tend to treat group behavior as biologically determined, but people have agency. Groups and cultures can change based on changing ideas and values. You can see that in the African American community in the middle of the 20th century. When the welfare state developed, the outcomes in the African American communities in the United States tended to change. Why? Well, people made a choice. I mean, sure, we acknowledge that there was a change in the laws. We acknowledge that laws have effects on people. But people made choices individually. And those choices did shift the entire culture. For example, the choice to be a welfare mom. That's an individual choice. Nobody's making you do that. I mean, for the most part. People have agency. Groups and cultures can change. So if you overlook that fact, then you're in danger of treating other people unfairly and unreasonably. Now, I want to bring up this post that I saw Jacob Brunton made a while back. He said, race is not culture. All races are equal. All cultures are not. We need to tend to culture. Culture can be changed. We need to differentiate between race and culture and not assume that somebody is a certain culture just because they're a certain race. And Jacob says all races are equal, all cultures are not. Now, a lot of people who think that race equals culture are going to say, oh, that would be a racist comment to say that all cultures are not equal. But if you study history, you know that all cultures are not equal. Certainly, the United States is a better country than Nazi Germany or than a cannibal society. So, I mean, unless you just want to say that the cannibals are morally equal to non-cannibals, you're going to be in a problem if you want to say that all cultures are equal. But we don't think we have to connect culture and race the way a lot of people do. And so we don't think that we are being prejudicial racially if we say that all cultures are unequal. What we believe is that all races are equal. Now, somebody asked an honest question. They said, well, okay, in what sense do you mean all races are equal? Because didn't we just discuss how there could be different outcomes on aggregate for a specific group of people at a specific time and place? Yes. So the questioner says, I would say that regardless of race, people have value as being human beings. They're image bearers of God. And he's right there. And I would say that there are objective ways in which group measurements on aggregate do not equal each other at given points in time. But I would also say that what Jacob is referring to here is equality of status under God politically and morally. Every word in that matters. When he says that the races are equal, he means the members of each individual racial group, however you want to define that, have equal status under God politically and morally. Now, they may not have the same status in a certain political system. Maybe a certain political system makes them slaves. But under God, they have the same status. So let's talk about that. So each person, no matter his ancestry, stands equally under God as responsible for his own life. So that's what it means to stand equally under God. So no one has been declared by God to have been justly born into a position of slavery to another man. That's the point. No one was declared by God to be less morally worthy than another man simply by virtue of his ancestry. In God's eyes, you're not morally inferior based on your parents. And you're not a slave by right based on your parents. Now, secondarily, I'd also point out it's improper to prejudge one individual's ability or his intelligence or skill or something like that based on his ancestry. That's part of what it means when we say that all races are equals. We are not going to prejudge individuals. So that's another meaning there. Look, this is an open discussion right now, and I mean, some of these things are hard to talk about without looking like you're a bad person or without looking like you're insensitive. And so for that reason, a lot of people in the alt-right or in the neo-reactionary conservative movement or in the kinist movement or white nationalist movement have begun to just laugh at any discussion of racism or racial bigotry. And they've begun to say, we can't really discuss this, so we're just going to laugh whenever anybody brings it up. Now, I think we need to have an honest discussion about it. And if you're the kind of person who is arguing politically, hey, we need to close the border because there's just too many people that have too many different sets of values and we have not been able to assimilate, we should close the borders. If they said that, I would disagree with them, but I would not shut them out of discussion. I think these are the kinds of things that we have to talk about, even if these people are wrong.